it wasn't the case that everything that was happening in your life that you wanted to share with everyone in your friend graph. And this is particularly true for teenagers. Teenagers have more compartmentalized social graphs. Like there are things that they're comfortable sharing with their parents. There's things that they're comfortable sharing with their friends, and they don't want to share in between the two.
If you have a business, you need a website. What's the best way to get a website up and running? By choosing a company that makes it simple, like Pair Networks. Pair has over 20 years of experiences managing the entire digital ecosystem for thousands of online businesses all around the world. Pair makes it really easy for you with do-it-yourself website building tools and features, including simple drag and drop page design. And they have guaranteed US-based support technicians ready to help you whenever you need it, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Right now, when you sign up with Pair Networks, you will receive 1 free month of web hosting. See for yourself how easy it is to build your website for free. That's pair.com/grace to get started today. Hi, Ravi. How are you today?
How are you doing?
So when you were growing up, your dad got you a PC-to-C computer, and then you started like programming. And then at one point, even Steve Wozniak, the founder of Apple, sent you money. And then now you have like been the chief product officer of Tinder, and you're doing such a great things in your career. You just founded your own company. Tell us more about like how you started and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I started when I was really young. My dad, he was an exec at American Express. He did a large order of PCs for his team and decided to get one for the house. This was in the early days. This was like, not to date myself, but I think this was '84. And so there wasn't a lot of people with PCs. There wasn't a lot of adoption yet. There wasn't much to do other than to learn how to program. And so I learned how to program. I really fell in love with it at an early age and decided to start creating things. So I started a game company when I was in high school. I dropped out of college to do that full time. During that time, the way that I would basically make money on the games was make them available for free, and then people could send in donations if they wanted to. I got donations from all over the world, something like 30 countries. And one of the donations was from Steve Wozniak, one of the founders of Apple, and it had his famous Woz signature on the check. I never cashed it, so I probably threw his checking account out of balance or his checkbook out of balance, but I still have it. It's framed. It's something I really, really treasure. And since then, I've been in love with consumer tech. I've always worked in consumer tech. I spent a little bit of time outside of it in management consulting, but really missed the aspect of building things. And so went back into consumer tech after summer in management consulting. I've been in all sorts of different domains in travel and gaming and social and dating. The thing that's really unified everything is one, focusing on consumer, but I've also since my early days at Microsoft focused on social. So I was one of the first PMs working on Xbox. I spent time on Xbox Live, both on the content side as well as on the service side. And I've always been fascinated by how technology is changing the way that people interrelate to each other, not just from a communication standpoint, but also from an entertainment standpoint and other elements. And so recently started a new company called Scale, which is focused on making one-on-one professional coaching more accessible to people. So I think there's a lot of anxiety right now about how do I navigate the workplace and succeed. And there's a lot of innovation around coaching, which I think is kind of the next level of social, is how do you create really productive relationships between people that help them level up. And we see that with things like Talkspace, with some of the things that are happening in the healthcare space, where technology, I think, is connecting people in much richer and more interesting ways today than it has in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many questions, as mentioned previously in our previous conversation. I feel like I have just so many questions about like your new company. But before we jump in, I want to say, like, I think for anyone to be super successful, everyone have to play with their strength, right? So like, what do you think is your unfair advantage?
I think mine throughout my career has been, I think, probably two things. One is being really obsessive about what creates value for the end user. I think it's really easy at a company to get lost in strategy and metrics and focus on what are the things that we need to do to grow the business. And when you do that, you start to kind of pull away from the customer and solve more for what the company needs and less for what the customer needs. I've always done a lot of one-on-one focus group research and usability studies. Done it both informally and formally, and felt like yes, companies need to grow, but have been a strong advocate for the voice of the customer. And I think another thing related to that is, I like to kind of zoom into individual details. I think, just the copy on a page, the way a call to action looks, the immersiveness, the fluidity of an animation or an interaction is just as important as like the big marketplace strategy that a company might be using. And at the end of the day, those moments when a person is interacting moment to moment with the product either create delight or create confusion. And so I tend to be very, very detailed oriented. So that kind of both obsessing about what the consumer wants and then being really detail oriented about, what is it we're delivering? How are we providing value? Are two things I really value and I look for in really strong product leaders and product managers.
Absolutely. So I feel like, so here's like, I hear that you have a passion for kind of like helping the customer and then creating a product that will like help people with something. So to like just piggyback on that thought, like to helping people with something or like creating a successful product, what exactly is the core goes into product management? So for example, do you feel like it's a psychology project? For example, you understand how people behave, how people think, and then figuring out what's their like deep down fear issue or like whatever? Or do you feel like it's more of like a testing, which is like a more analytical project, which you study the user and everything?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think product management today is a very broad role. And so it's very difficult for a single PM to be great at every single thing that is required of a product manager or a product team within a company. A lot of the things are really at tension as well in terms of what makes for a great product manager. I think a classic example is, are you a design-driven product person or are you an analytics-driven product person? And oftentimes, people are one or the other, not both at the same time. But it really takes the combination of the two to create great things. And so I have a post on my blog about the 3 pillars of decision making for product managers. And I think if you go back to the real fundamentals, there's really only 3 ways that PMs can make decision. They can make decision based on their intuition. Really good product managers have great product sense, have a good intuitive sense of what solves very completely and delightfully for a customer. You can also make decisions based on analytics. So, we live in a very data-rich environment. Being able to zoom into those analytics, make decisions with them is really important. And then you can make decisions based on customer feedback. So what are you hearing qualitatively for customers in terms of what's working or not working for them? And the combination of those 3 things, intuition, analytics, and feedback, are the pillars of making really good product decisions. But the challenge is that most people tend to gravitate towards one type of decision making over another. So, very craft oriented product folks tend to rely on their intuition. And if they have really good intuition, that can lead them to a very high hit rate. Very analytical, experimentation driven product folks tend to rely on analytics. A lot of times in especially sales driven companies, you tend to rely on customer feedback. And so it's good to have, a bias towards a particular way of decision making and be really spiky and have a competitive advantage there. But it's also really important to understand that there's 2 other legs of the stool and to try to strike a balance as you make decisions and draw from both what you're hearing from customers, what the analytics are saying, and what intuitively you feel creates value for the user.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love what you said about like one part is like the instinct and then analytics and then feedback. So I feel like you need great combination of everything to create a successful product. You also mentioned about this in like a comparison of the Snapchat like founder kind of like created a product and based on intuition and the same as like Facebook, but Facebook was like iterating like all the time because they were like focusing on data, focusing on customer feedback. So which have led to like really different like results basically for their businesses. So I think like creating a great product and being a product leader are kind of 2 different things. So for example, you started as, you were a program manager slash actually a PM at Microsoft when you started your career. But now, like recently, your most recent job before you went on to found your own company, was the chief product officer of Tinder, right? So being a leader in the leadership position, what do you think were like the two different kind of like skill set that you need for either creating a product or like becoming a leader? Because as a leader, you probably have to focus on the revenue. You have to collaborate it with maybe like the chief revenue officer or something to make sure that you guys are, the product not only is gonna work, but also long-term or short-term need to generate a certain amount of revenue. What are some different skill set that you kind of like adapted to make sure that your career was, on top of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good question. And this is one of the reasons that product, I think, as well, is a hard role, is because it changes pretty fundamentally as you get more senior. When you start your career, the thing that you really need to master is how to build really fantastic products. As you become a manager, the thing that you need to master is how do you build really great product teams. And then as you become an executive, the thing that you need to master is how do you create really great systems that create really good product teams and really good products. And so that change, that evolution in terms of the responsibility of a product leader is really important to be mindful of and to proactively make sure that you're paying attention to. Because I think the biggest thing that, especially for really talented product leaders and product managers that are growing quickly, the thing where people often get tripped up is not to understand that the role has actually changed, that the thing that they did in the past to build a really great product is actually going to hold them back from building a really good product team. So the obsessiveness about the details, the working closely with, spending a lot of time on consumer research, those things that you do as an individual contributor to create a great product. If you do those when you're turned into a manager and you have a team, you can actually rob your team of the autonomy to make really good decisions and to understand how to chart their own path forward. And as a result, you don't get as much leverage as a manager as you could. Similarly, if you do that same thing when you move into an exec role and really focus on managing the teams day to day rather than creating the systems, the processes, the culture, then sometimes you can rob your managers of the autonomy that they have to be able to create really good product teams. So that, I think, is like the ultimate underlying foundation of the evolution. Those are at each level, there's definitely skills to be learned and mastered. And I think very growth-oriented people will figure it out. It's more a matter of changing your perspective and being cognizant of, in the classic way, what got you here won't get you there. And so, if people can kind of shift that perspective, understand that they're playing a different game, and then grow the skills that they need based on that new set of challenges, they'll be much better equipped to smoothly go through that changing set of requirements as they get more senior.
I think those are like a great answer. I really like what you said about, as a manager, you got to build up a system for the whole team to succeed, right? So in terms of like being a good PM and being a great PM leader, do you feel like you need to have a great product sense yourself, aka like you have to build a super successful product to be a great manager? Or do you think they're like not correlated in a way?
I think they're different but highly correlated. So I think really good product leaders and product executives have dynamic range, so they can zoom into the details and they can zoom out to the strategy. And they've got really good instincts regardless of what zoom level they're at. That doesn't mean that they micromanage all the details and don't give their teams autonomy and space, but it does mean that they can have a really good conversation with teams about the very detailed decisions that they're making to try to create value for the customers. I think another failure mode that I see for people that are really ambitious product managers that are looking to become product leaders is they kind of want to get the day-to-day product development behind them and become team managers and have their team worried about the day-to-day. And ultimately, that I think is not a recipe for success, because what you'll find is that if you don't have that mastery of the details, if you're not close to the product, if you're not close to the customers, if you're relying entirely on your team to fill in that gap, then when you need to make these really critical decisions, you have less experience to draw from, less opinion to draw from. And so, ultimately, especially a digital product that people are using is, a pretty tight screen on a mobile app or, an interface in a browser. And so whether or not the customer understands that, whether or not that solves the problem that they have is a very detailed thing. And if as a product leader, you're entirely focused on strategy and not at all focused on the details, you're going to miss out on creating things that are really great. And I think that this is one of the things that drives disruption. Like I think a lot of bigger companies lose share to smaller companies in part because they get away from the details and they start solving for what do we need to do to hit our Q4 numbers, not what do we need to do to, at a very tangible level, at a very detailed level, create value for customers. And then a startup can come along. They don't have any of the kind of legacy of what that big company is solving for. They don't have customers to keep happy, and they can just zone in on we need to create value, and let's do that really well and really quickly. And all of a sudden, a big company that thought that they were an incumbent is battling with a startup who has done a much better job of solving for the customer's needs.
Absolutely. I think they're definitely correlated. I definitely like what you said about, like, for example, they have to be able to like zoom out and zoom in. Like they need to be able to like know how to actually make something work, as well as having like the really overall broader view as like basically like a whole team overview. I definitely feel like that's like a great way to look at it. I'm curious. So you were like, one of your really successful experience early on in your career was like, not early on, but like in the middle of your career was you joined TripAdvisor, and then when you joined, they only have 7 people, and then 3 years later, it was like 70 people. And then can you tell us more about like, what is it like to grow a team there, and as well as like what's your career learnings throughout that period?
Yeah, so I joined TripAdvisor at a really interesting time. It was 2012. The company at the time was already pretty big, so it was about 1,500 people, but my product team was only about seven people. And one of the really interesting things that was happening at that particular moment for the company was it had been part of Expedia. The company had gotten acquired years before, had been part of the Expedia media group, and it was the management realized like there's much more value to be unlocked here if we roll TripAdvisor out as an independent public company. So the fact that TripAdvisor was newly independent meant that from a strategic standpoint, the company could start to do a lot of things that wouldn't have made sense as part of Expedia, but did make sense when TripAdvisor was independent. And so that kicked off a lot of strategic growth, which also drove a lot of growth in the product team. And for me, from a career standpoint, it was a really pivotal moment. It was a point where I got to go from managing, a smaller team of about 7 people to a much larger team. It's where I really got a lot of experience with hiring, a lot of experience with strategy, a lot of experience with building out large cross-organizational systems. And I think a lot of times when people are looking for career growth, they get attracted to the big names like Facebook or Google. And one of the things I encourage people to do, especially if they're looking for rapid career growth, is to ask themselves 2 questions before choosing a role. The first one is, how quickly is this company growing? Like your career is ultimately going to be rate limited by how quickly the company you're at is growing. And so, I think it's common knowledge, like if you want to grow quickly in your career, pick a company that's growing quickly, and a rising tide will float all boats. But the other question that I encourage people to ask is, how deep is the bench of talent at this company? When I joined TripAdvisor, there was a small, really talented team, but there wasn't a big team yet. And so when the opportunities came up related to the strategic shift that TripAdvisor was going through, the fact that I had demonstrated the ability to have impact and had credibility meant that a lot of those opportunities came my way. And so that created a really nice combination of a fast-growing company and a lot of opportunity, and me being the person that got a lot of opportunity as a result. And so as a result, I was able to grow my career quickly. In contrast, like I think a lot of people want to go to the big tech companies or other well-known companies, and there, a lot of times those companies are starting to slow down in terms of their growth. So the velocity is not as high. And then there's a really deep bench of talent there, so that when new opportunities come up, it's a little bit random as to whether or not those opportunities will come to you or someone else. And so the timelines for career growth at those companies tend to be much longer. It can take a year or more to get, to convince your manager that you're ready to manage one person, and then maybe another year to manage 2 or 3 people, versus I think with a lot of successful people, you can look at pivotal times in their career where they were able to get a disproportionate amount of impact because they were in a high growth environment, and they were in an environment where they were uniquely set up to make an impact in that environment.
Absolutely. I feel like through our chat previously, like I feel like this was something that like I really see like very different from like a lot of other people are saying. Many people are like, oh, just follow the smartest people. And then being in an environment that's like super hyper competitive, technically, it was because of you can learn. Of course, you can learn from smart people, but also if at one point you found out like there's a really great company and then they are like having a lot of opportunities because of they are growing really fast, as well as like they didn't have that like competitive environment, but you would be the person who was gonna be able to take on more responsibilities. I definitely feel like those are some great roles to like taking into consideration and can essentially accelerate your career because be you're able to like wearing a lot of hats and then being able to experience so many different responsibilities and like just seeing new things. I'm curious. So like you, after that experience, you have joined Facebook as well as like Tinder. Eventually you're developing product strategies for Gen Z. What do you think were like some specific things that you were looking at in this specific audience group? How do you kind of like come up with strategy for this specific user group?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the reasons that I decided to go from TripAdvisor to Facebook was the opportunity to focus on Gen Z oriented products and to really understand what was happening with younger users around social, in part because it was something I didn't know a lot about. This was a really significant learning opportunity for me to kind of get closer to an area that I was really curious about. I started my career at Microsoft. I started working on Xbox. I did a lot of work in gaming. So I have experience building out entertainment products and building out products that are focused on a younger demographic. But since then, things had changed a lot. And the specific team that I joined at Facebook was really committed to understanding. At the time that I joined, it was around 2017. We were in the middle of this shift where a lot of teenagers had been using Facebook, but were moving off of Facebook and using Instagram and Snap more. And we wanted to understand better why that was happening. One of the key things, I think Facebook doesn't talk about it a lot, but Facebook has a really deep and exceptionally talented user research team. And there's hundreds of user researchers. From a user research standpoint, there's much more user researchers to product managers than I've seen anywhere else. So as a product leader at Facebook, you have a lot of opportunity to talk to users, to do continuous research, and to understand what's happening. And things have changed a little bit, but at the time we noticed a few things that were really important. I think the two big ones at the time were where Facebook was not meeting the needs that were changing pretty rapidly. One was people wanted to have a lot more control over who was seeing what they were sharing. Facebook was built on the idea that when you share something, it goes out to your entire social network. But once people's graphs got to be 1,000, 2,000 people, it wasn't the case that everything that was happening in your life that you wanted to share with everyone in your friend graph. And this is particularly true for teenagers. Teenagers have more compartmentalized social graphs. Like there are things that they're comfortable sharing with their parents. There's things that they're comfortable sharing with their friends, and they don't want to share in between the two. But even within a friend group, teens have friends that are close friends that they're willing to share some things with, teens that are broader friends that they're willing to share with. They have high school communities that they're willing to share certain things with. And so the ability to actually control who's going to see what was increasingly important and not something that Facebook was doing a good job solving for, but Snap was doing a really good job solving for. And so there was this broader shift from feed-based social to more messaging-based social. The way that surfaced with Snap was being able, supporting messaging directly, and the way that surfaced on Instagram was Instagram's adoption of stories. And those two things, messaging and stories, gives people a lot more control over who's going to see what, which is something that all users need, but particularly younger users needed. And then the second thing that we saw was that at the time, social media was becoming much more visual and much more video centric. And so that was, of course, something Snap was innovating around. TikTok and Musical.ly were innovating around it. but Facebook wasn't as video centric at the time. And so as people were looking for more immersive, more visual ways to share about themselves, they couldn't do it on Facebook. They had to go elsewhere to do it. And so those are the two kind of trends that we saw at the time. Those have continued to play out. I think there's some of the trends that underpin the success that TikTok has had, the continued success that Snap has had. And we were able to get to those insights through not looking at the analytics, but having a lot of conversations, literally, talking to hundreds of people in different age demos, not just about how they use social media, but just how they think about friendships, how they think about relationships. And through those conversations, we were able to understand where social media fit with how people were thinking about relationships and where it didn't fit.
For sure. I love all these major findings. I'm curious, how did you arrive at these great findings? So for example, I think when you think about let's say when you joined Tinder, the first day, what were something that you were doing to get to know the company, as well as get to know the product, get to know about the user, and how do you kind of come up with a really tailored strategy about it to that particular company? Because for example, I think the trend is kind of really easy to find. For example, on TikTok, everybody is hitting the dopamine, every single second you're swiping. The feature I think is really easy to copy, but why do you feel like that specific company or that specific product can succeed on that platform? And then for Facebook and Snapchat, there are similarities for sure, but what do you feel make a particular company unique? I guess how do you figure out what is a good product to build for your team, I guess?
Yeah, so I'll go into kind of at the time at Facebook 2017, TikTok was not a household name. There was definitely people moving off of Facebook to Instagram and Snap. This was also around the time that Vine was winding down. And we started to look at sort of what people wanted from short format video entertainment. Not in that way, but we came to it just by having conversations with people. And one of the things that was really interesting that we heard over and over again were kind of two things. One was, I used to go to Facebook for my memes that I would share with my friends. And I can't do that anymore. And part of the reason that was the case was that Facebook had done a lot of work to improve its algorithms to eliminate what it considered to be spammy content. But that spammy content was actually exactly the content that Gen Z was looking for. Because at the end of the day, people are in that age range are constantly talking to each other. And the medium of communication between each other is the funny things that they're finding that they want to share. And they weren't able to find those things on Facebook any longer, but they were able to find them on Facebook on Instagram and Snap and other places. One other really interesting thing that we heard, which was weird, was people talked a lot about watching Vine compilations on YouTube. So Vine was no longer available, but they still loved Vines. They talked a lot about Vines. And for a product that didn't really exist at the time, it was weird that teens were talking about it. And they would go to YouTube to find compilations, and then they would share those compilations with their friends. So an insight that we had in the moment was, what's really interesting here is people are missing a way to find funny content that's shareable. Vine used to solve for that. Facebook used to solve for that. The only thing that sort of makes sense today that's really solving for that is Musical.ly. But Musical.ly was too focused on music, and what people would say about Musical.ly is that it's cringy. And so there was this desire to find funny content, not cringy content. And that was ultimately, I think, part of the thing that TikTok figured out. TikTok figured out that short format video was not about music videos, was not about lip syncing, but was about humorous content. And so when they acquired Musical.ly and they rebranded it and they changed the feed, they basically took the track that Vine was already on and built a much bigger business around it and solved for a really interesting unmet need that we were able to uncover just through one-on-one conversations and by identifying patterns. But the point at which we uncovered it was too late. TikTok had already figured this out and was already full steam ahead on kind of building that out as a solution for people.
Because of you're talking about a lot of insights, right? Besides having a lot of one-on-one conversations with the users, what does your content information look like? What is your information diet to kind of grow this great product sense or like these like developing these instincts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've actually cut down on my information diet quite a bit, trying to spend more time heads down on the startup and less time consuming things. I have a couple of newsletters that I go to. One is a private one that just that does a great job of compiling the news for the day. I spend time on that. I'm actually I get an MIT newsletter as well that's really well done and goes into topics and then shares articles about those topics. I spend some time on Twitter. And yeah, I don't have a particular place that I go. I just try to keep my eyes open. And if there's an interesting trend, double click into it and try to understand it a little bit better and talk to people that are around that or thinking about it.
I'm saying like you also have a newsletter. So like today, I think the last minute I post the poster, someone messaged me, says like, they signed up your newsletter before and stuff like that. So, your newsletter is a great start for like people who are like interested in the PMing content. And like recently, so you started building your own company, and talk more about like, how did you arrive at like this specific sector, and like what were some observations that you've seen that you feel like this particular company is going to solve for people?
And so this goes back to a lot of what I talked about. One of the things that I think is important to identify really interesting opportunities are the one-on-one conversations with people to get a really deep understanding of people's problems. You can definitely like zoom out and look at the numbers and quantify a space, but I think there's a lot more to be gained by talking one-on-one to people and getting a deep understanding rather than a broad understanding. And so over the last 18 months, I've been an executive in residence at Reforge. I've helped create their product leadership program. I helped launch and host their product strategy program. I've had over 1,000 people go through that program. I've also connected with hundreds of people that are in the tech industry or other industries where high performance is a really important part of success. And the thing that I kept hearing over and over again is there's all these ways to learn. There's lots of books and podcasts, and I have no shortage of frameworks or concepts or ideas that I can use. But what I don't have reliably is the support to understand how to actually translate those ideas into my work and be more successful. And so people are feeling this, especially post-pandemic, are feeling this significant lack of support in the work that they're doing. I think it's one of the things that's underpinning this idea of the Great Resignation. People are feeling oftentimes that they're working without the support that they need, and they're not sure whether or not that makes sense given what they want to accomplish. And so Victoria, my co-founder, and I started talking about this trend that we were seeing. She was seeing it as well, which basically boils down to people putting a lot of pressure on themselves to succeed, but not feeling like they have the support to do that. And us both, kind of thinking about the fact that in our careers, one of the things that's played a really important role is coaching. And so having someone who is an independent sounding board that you can go to, that you can bounce ideas off of, who can help you figure things out, is a really important way to break through any sort of obstacles that you might be facing. But coaching is not very accessible for people. It's very expensive. It's hard to find a good coach. And so we spent the last 6 months since we started the company doing a lot of experimentation and product discovery around how can we reinvent coaching? How can we deliver it in a way that's a lot more scalable? And we've been inspired by products that we've seen around us that are doing this in other domains. Noom is doing this around nutrition counseling. Peloton and Future are doing it around personal training. Talkspace is doing it around therapy. Calm and Headspace are doing it around meditation and mindfulness. And so in all of these different areas, companies have reinvented what used to be a relationship between a person and a one-on-one provider. And we've been focused on how do we accomplish that same thing to help people level up professionally and get to where they want to go.
Yeah, for sure. What exactly is like the unique insight for like what motivates mentors to be on the platform? So if let's say yourself, you're the chief product officer of Tinder and like you work at all these like big tech companies and you're essentially super successful and your time is extremely valuable. And then there's like 4,000 people messaging on LinkedIn to hey, can I pick your brain on blah, blah, blah? And like, if I'm paying you like a small amount of fee, you probably think, not worth my time. And if I'm paying you a giant amount of fee as a user myself, like I would be like really concerned. What if I don't get like my ideal feedback? How do you kind of like find the balance? And then what motivated the coach to kind of like teaching people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think from an individual person who's looking to become more successful, you don't necessarily need like a coach who's been a CPO or, I think a lot of people tend to go to like, let me learn how to build a business from Bill Gates or from Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, yeah, they've got interesting insights to share, but also they've got a pretty unique story. What's really valuable with coaching is the ability to have like a candid one-on-one conversation and to get a third person's perspective. And there are people that are incredibly gifted at creating the space to be able to do that. And so, I think generally for people that are looking for coaching, it's less about like finding the most, the coach that has like the most senior titles and more about finding a person that's uniquely great at that. For the people that are great at that and want to do it, I think they do it for all sorts of reasons. One of the things that's been really surprising for Victoria and I is that a lot of people have moved into coaching, not necessarily for, the professional or the financial side of things, but because they really enjoy it. They really get a lot of fulfillment out of it. And in doing that, the problem that they're solving is they want to connect with people who are genuinely motivated to learn. They want to be there to help support them, and they want to do it in a way where they can spend their most time mentoring people and spend less time like thinking about how to market their business, creating material, doing paperwork, all that sort of stuff. And so the value proposition that we as a company are offering for the coaches is this is a platform where you can spend more of your time connecting with people who want your support and do it in a way that's really structured, where we're providing a lot of great material to help get you started, so that as a coach, you can focus on the thing that you really enjoy, which is that one-on-one connection with someone and helping them level up. And the value to the person on the member side is you can come to scale and know that you're going to get coaches of a high quality. And one of the things we've been doing some building around is this idea of creating guided master classes. So rather than just coming to scale for having an open conversation with the coach, where each conversation may or may not yield a lot of value, instead we provide these master classes that really structure what you're learning and the conversations that you're having with a coach, so that you are getting the maximum value out of learning how to solve the problems that you want to solve and out of the feedback that you're getting from your coach.
So I can think of two questions that are like instantly on my mind. One thing is like, what is the difference between like a coach and a consultant? And the other question is like, so a lot of times, like when we're finding a coach or when we're finding a mentor, yesterday I was chatting with someone who were coached by Bill Campbell. So he's like a VC, and then like Bill Campbell is like, as you know, it's like one of the most famous coach in Silicon Valley who coached like Steve Jobs and stuff. So basically he told me the inside of like Bill Campbell's coaching, why it's so different. It was because of like, he would be able to pick brains from, let's say like a smaller company CEO to be like, hey, if Apple is creating blah, blah, blah tomorrow, what are you going to do? And then he will also maybe ask Steve Jobs, like, this small company, is doing blah, 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 what should they do? So basically essentially leveraging this network to create some sort of like answer for something. Just curious, like, so because of that's like a network that's within the coach. So the coach's value point was because of they have a really exclusive network. How is like a professional coach, for example, like a therapist or someone that they may be just like working with you or bouncing off strategy with you, and like how is this network piece going to be benefit for the people who are using this platform?
Yeah, one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is like, what is the taxonomy of problems that a person, especially in the middle of their career, is facing, and how can we make sure that we are compiling the very best set of ideas to allow them to tackle those problems. And it turns out like those problems tend to converge on a very similar set of things, especially for newer managers. There's challenges around time management. Like, I'm going from managing my own time to managing my team's time. How do I do that in a way that's really high leverage, where I feel like I'm adding value for my team and I feel like I'm not spreading myself too thin, trying to do too much? Related to that, there's challenges around delegation. Like, what should I do? What should I rely on my team to do. There's challenges around leadership and motivation. There's challenges around managing up. Like, how do now I'm not just representing my own work, I'm representing the work of the team around me. How do I do that in a really effective way that gets me the support and the resources that I need? There's challenges around strategy. Like, I'm taking on a broader role. How do I think about how that role connects into what the company is trying to accomplish and not just what each individual is trying to accomplish? And so we spent a lot of time kind of building out that structure of ideas. We have a lot more work to do, but the insight that we've had so far in terms of reinventing how coaching works is to think about the fact that people who are in the middle of their career who could really benefit from coaching, who are at a moment where, depending on the decisions they make, they're going to get compounding returns one way versus another way. There's a pretty common set of problems where if we can aggregate the right ideas, the right coaches to help people through those problems, we can add a lot of value at a pivotal moment in a person's career, which is pretty different than what Bill Campbell and what a lot of executive coaches are solving for. The types of challenges that the CEO of a Fortune 500 company has are really unique and rarefied, which is great. But they aren't always the best thing for someone who's in the middle of their career to learn from. And so we've deliberately focused on people that are at that kind of middle point in their career, coming up with the right set of ideas, building a team of the right people to help them with those challenges, rather than focusing on the executive coaching side of things, which is a little bit different.
I love it. Like, I feel like there's definitely a market for people who is already accomplished a certain level of success in their career. And then eventually they want to kind of like get on the next level instead of just like an executive coach or someone working with a specific really high level people, basically. So I'm curious, because of this coaching business, the business model is like essentially really human heavy, right? Like, it's you're managing the coach and you're managing this entire system. So the tech component is not that strong. And from your background, I feel like you're a really technical person, who get money from Steve Wozniak when they were like in their teens. So, and then now, like, how do you see, when you're like a co-founder of this company, what do you see as your strengths that could place into this company? And the second part is like, when you guys are training these coaches, when they build a significant amount of like reputation capital on your platform and then they peace out. Like, for example, I was listening to a podcast, like someone was saying like essentially all the business are bundling and unbundling. So like you guys are essentially like bundling all these coaches with their own cloud together. And then eventually one day when someone's like follower or like I guess like the human like reputation went through the roof, and then they just decided to leave. And then at that point, how do you make sure that they stay on your platform?
Yeah, all really good questions. I think both Victoria and we're consumer product people, right? And so we're approaching this not as like a human services business where where it's really the core business is connecting one person with another, and then we get out of the way. What we're doing a lot of thinking about, we don't have all the answers, we're still in the middle of doing product discovery, is how do we rethink coaching to make it much more scalable? And so when you have a typical coaching session, you have the right coach with the right client, and they meet for 60 minutes and it goes really well. That's an extraordinarily effective way to get feedback. But at the same time, it hasn't changed that much. There hasn't been a lot of innovation around it, but there has been a ton of innovation around personal training with things like Peloton, or meditation coaching with things like Calm and Headspace. And so a key thing that we've asked ourselves, which is a hard question, is what are the elements of coaching that we can productize? And we came to the conclusion pretty early on that you can't productize the human out of coaching. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And there's certainly companies that are trying to do that, but the problem is they deliver kind of a cold, aloof experience that feels too programmatic and doesn't feel human enough. I think a lot of what people need today is really around that human connection and that human feedback. And so we're thinking about the business as, similar to how you talked about it, right? As like a social business, as a business where there's reputation, as a business where we're connecting people. And so if we can do that in a really effective way, and part of that means having the reputation systems, but part of that also means having the content and the structure so that we can help people get better coaching and give better coaching. then we feel like we can create a marketplace of ideas, a marketplace of connections with coaches that helps people be more successful, that people won't want to leave, because we're doing a lot more than just that one-on-one connection where they can then take that off platform. We're creating, all of the systems necessary to discover the right ideas, discover the right people to help you. And so people want to continue to engage on the platform. Anytime you're building a marketplace, there definitely is challenges around disintermediation, but we're thinking about it much less in terms of how do we keep people from moving off the platform, and much more in terms of how do we build a lot of value that you can only build within a platform.
I'm curious, like when it comes to like coaching the coaches, what is their curriculum look like? Like, how do you coach the coaches? And is that going to be like a therapist come in and be like, okay, so this is how you listen, and then this is how you take notes, and then like the other part would be like, this is a Harvard Business Review, like a strategic like decision session or whatever? Or it's like a therapist, like they specialize in something. So for example, they specialize in anxiety management, or like CBT, or like something that's like particularly towards one set of skills. Like how do you kind of like think about it in your own like coaching group?
Yeah. So this is something we've done a lot of experimentation around. We initially started with, we think there's an interesting way to take what Talkspace is doing by providing text-based therapy and provide that in for professional coaching. And by being able to do that, we're going to be able to lower the price point and get a lot more people access to coaches. But what we found with that is that coach-client relationship would drop off really quickly, and it was harder to get a member to really get the most value, and it was harder to really train a coach to be able to deliver great text-based coaching to someone. And so our next set of experiments were around an idea we're calling guided masterclasses, where each week you get some content in a particular area. So we have one guided masterclass on leveling up as a PM. We have another one on managing a high performance team. We have another one on navigating a promotion. We have another one on how to achieve peak productivity. And so each of these programs is 4 weeks. At the beginning of the week, you get content which presents you with a number of ideas. One of the things that's really unique is that content's not, you don't spend hours on that content that's micro learning. You can go through it really, really quickly. And then as part of that, you get a series of questions, anywhere from like 10 to 20 questions, which you can answer really quickly, that help you put those ideas that you just learned into practice. That then goes to your coach. So your coach can see, here's what we learned this week. Here's how you're thinking about what we learned. And so like, let's say it's the leveling up as a PM course. We might ask a person like, where have you found most fulfillment in the type of work that you're doing? New product development work, or scaling work, or growth work? And then having a person answer that question, that helps them get to a better understanding of where they find fulfillment, what they're really good at. And then the coach gets a package with all of that information, can go through it, and then that creates a really nice structured way for the person and their coach to have a conversation about, how does a person want to think about the next steps in their career. And so one of the ways that we've approached providing more quality is by providing that structure. And that's enabled us to train coaches and help them deliver a much better experience, not just through the training, but also through the structure of how people engage with their coach. And so that's kind of what we talk when we're thinking about productizing coaching. Those are the types of things that we're thinking about to try and create more structure in that relationship.
For sure. I think this is so interesting to think about, right? Like, for example, if you're creating like a tag-driven product, you just have to create it once, and then you test it to the user, and then you revamp it, and then like everybody gets the same experience. But for coaching, I feel like it's just a numbers game, because there's just so many different style of coaches out there. And then it's similar to a therapist, right? You have to meet the one that like you really liked, as well as like you have to make sure that they fit into like whatever your lack of, kind of like they can like train you in a specific thing. So I feel like the people became your product, which make me feel like it's a lot of like management related things as a PM. So like you have to think about like, or like as a chief product officer, you have to think about, how do I recreate a certain type of experience for everybody so that everybody can get like a similar level of experiences on the platform. And each person have like all have like really, really different struggles in their career and level of their career. So I feel like this is like probably one of the hardest job to like manage a product and manage a ton of people at the same time.
And I think one of the really interesting things about this space is there is so much diversity there. You have life coaches and career coaches and productivity coaches and coaches that can help with strategy and coaches that can help with leadership and product coaches and growth coaches. And so there's this incredible diversity of different people that are wanting to help others level up. But there's no one place that, if you're someone who's looking to level up in a certain way, that you can actually go in order to find the right advice at the right moment. So that's really our mission, is like, how can we create that place that takes this entire diversity of coaching and puts it, accessible to people? Because even people that have like an executive coach where they can afford it or their company is providing it, you get kind of one coach. That coach has their expertise, and if you have a question that's outside of their expertise, they can help you through it. But you're not getting the very best coaching. Whereas you might want to go to one person for productivity and a completely different person for leadership, or if you're thinking about the next step in your career, a different person for that. Or if you're not even sure what you want your career to be, what you want your life to be, a different person for that. And so that's our long-term mission, is to create that place where you can get that diversity of support in all the different areas that are necessary to make a person successful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one person in the audience is asking, what are the outcome metrics to understand if your coaching program is working?
Yeah, I think there's 3 types of outcome metrics for coaching. This is kind of separate from our startup, but if you're thinking about coaching for yourself, the way that you can evaluate it, the first one is self-reporting. Like, do you feel like the coaching is working for you? Do you feel more confident? Do you feel like you have clearer ideas? Do you feel like you're getting the feedback that you need? And that alone is a really important thing, because ultimately whether or not a person is successful comes down to, do you feel like you're being successful? And if you feel like you are being successful, oftentimes you accrue more success. And if you feel like you're stuck or you're not being successful, that can have a vicious cycle to it. So the self-reporting is really important. And if you're working with a coach, I encourage you to, each time you engage with the coach, like, take stock of, do I feel like supported? Do I feel like I'm making progress on my goals? The second thing that's really important, and a lot of executive coaches rely on this, is 360 feedback. And a lot of times, especially if you're working on coaching in a particular domain, or you're working on coaching related to your leadership, being able to get feedback both at the beginning of your coaching and then midway through or at the end of your coaching from other people, so they can keep you honest about how you're showing up and where you're making progress, is really important. And then the third way to measure, I think, are based on extrinsic milestones. Like, did I get the promotion that I wanted? Did the company achieve this goal that I set out? And so that combination of self-reporting, 360 feedback, plus external measurements are a really good way to triangulate whether or not coaching is working for you.
So we already talk a lot about coaching, and then we're going to talk about something light and fun, at least for me. Okay, so the last session would be like, you and I built a product together. So I was thinking, I think I probably told you last time, like I said, I'm thinking about like creating a crypto related newsletter. If you and I are the co-founder of this crypto newsletter, like, how should we go about study the market, and then like what exactly should goes into the planning of creating a successful product?
Yeah, I think the first question is, who are you creating it for? Are you creating it from a crypto standpoint? You can ask the question of like, am I creating it for people that are down the rabbit hole, that really are like crypto enthusiasts and they get it? Or am I creating for people that haven't gone down the rabbit hole, and for people that want to kind of get exposure to what's going on? And depending on what your answer is to that, your newsletter is going to look really different. Your target market's going to look really different. So that's the first thing that I would start with is, as you think about creating a crypto newsletter, who are you creating it for? What's their level of experience with crypto? And what, as they get more experience about crypto, what are they going to do with that experience?
Let's say we're created for non-technical people who are just starting, who is not the bankless reader, because it's just too advanced for people on my level. So
perfect. That's great. So now that you have a target, these are people that are new to crypto, they're non-technical, but they're curious about what's happening and they're trying to understand how this impacts their life. Then I think the question is like, where else are they going today for information about crypto? And so where do you feel like they're going today?
I actually think they're not going anywhere. They're going to like crypto whiteboard. I think crypto whiteboard is one, and then the other is like 99 Bitcoin or something. So there's like 2 YouTube channel about like how-tos, 20 minutes or something long, like literally someone explaining to you what's going on with something. I think crypto space is like really, really abstract. So like I actually don't know where people go for like the super beginner stuff.
Perfect. So I think 2 questions come out of that. One is, do they not know where to go because those places don't exist, or because they don't know how to discover them? And so I think both the answers to both of those questions are important. The discovery question, I think, will inform your marketing. Like, how do you actually get the word out about your crypto newsletter? And those things don't exist will inform what are the things that you want to cover within the newsletter. And so I think both of those are important to kind of crafting the go-to-market as well as your product strategy.
You mentioned such a great point. I actually was going to ask you about like what's your like go-to-market strategy? Just because right now, nowadays, creating a product is extremely easy, and like getting the feedback on time. Like for me, I thought about just building in public, right? Like for example, you tweet about everything all the time, and then like people discover it through Twitter or like through LinkedIn Live. And for your product, like what's your go-to-market strategy? Or like we don't have to talk about how you plan to go to market. We can just use like an example to think of like what would be like a good way for people to discover this newsletter, or whatever you think makes sense.
I think for us, we're figuring it out. Like there's different go-to-market strategies depending on whether you're web-centric or mobile, depending on who we want to go after. So far, I think like one of the key elements of the go-to-market strategy will be building a community and building content, and using LinkedIn as a key distribution platform. We're also looking at TikTok. So TikTok has a really interesting universe of really great content. And so we're looking at ways that we can get into that space and really help to show off what we're doing on TikTok. We're looking at a couple of other things as well. And so I think you're exactly right. Like it's gotten much easier to create a product and much harder to market a product. There's just so much noise out there, and a lot of the mechanisms that people think about using are kind of like one-off. Like a lot of people say, okay, our first part of launching our product is going to be product hunt, which is great, and you get a short-term influx of users, but that's not a sustainable growth loop for the company. And so I think from a distribution standpoint, it's a matter of both figuring out the channels as well as figuring out how you're going to use those channels in a way that creates a compounding loop based on the value that you're driving for people. And so for this particular case, I think an interesting question is like, where are these people today and where do you go for them? If you had said like, I'm creating a crypto newsletter for people that are already crypto enthusiasts, then Discord's a great place. But if you are creating it for people that are crypto newbies, then you've got to go where they are today. And where do you think they would be?
Home.
Definitely at home. Yeah, that's true.
Like if you're really expert, you're tweeting about it all the time, or you're posting on LinkedIn, you're posting on everywhere, right? But the people who are not tweeting or not like LinkedIn or like not promoting it is the people that are like, I kind of know, but I kind of also don't know. I think that's where they are at. Anyway, so we have a 1 minute little fire round for this. Number 1 question is like, what's your favorite book?
The one that comes to mind, actually, I read about a year ago. It's a book for kids called Pax, which is a novel about a little boy and his pet fox, but it's really about war. It's like this very deep, it's aimed at kids. I don't know how kids process it, but it was such a beautiful book. It's like one of the only times I've actually cried at the end of a book. Got it for my daughter. I read it, and then I decided I wasn't going to let her read it because it was just very gut-wrenching.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I think the person who made the biggest impact is Adam Medros, who is the head of product at TripAdvisor. Just a fantastic people leader. I learned a ton from him. He gave me a bunch of opportunity. He gave me a bunch of support. So as I look back, he's the person that I think of first.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
To my dinner party. I can't invite anyone. It's Omicron. I don't want to get COVID.
So where can we find you outside of work?
These days, I'm usually with my kids. Lately, we've been staying home a lot just because of what's going on, playing a lot of video games. Other than that, usually outside. I'm a big hiker and mountain biker. We live in LA. We live close to Santa Monica Mountains. So I feel lucky I can get there in a few minutes. Yeah,
that's awesome. So the last question, since we're on LinkedIn, where can we find you on LinkedIn?
It's just Ravi Mehta. So it's my name with nothing. So RAVI MEHTA. So no punctuation, dashes, or anything.
It's a perfect time to end our session today. Thank you guys.
Nice to meet everyone. Thank you. Feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Bye.